Ladies and gentlemen, good evening, as it is indeed evening as I record this episode of Prototype. We are going to be talking about finding a voice on the 42nd episode of my solo game design podcast. I am Pronogo, and you might have guessed that based on the channel name. Let's talk about, indeed, finding a voice. But we'll also mention that 42 is 27 away from 69, because I am just mentally ill to have memorized that particular factoid for you. These are two very important numbers in my life, as you may have guessed, and so 27 becomes the third number, because 3. So, I wanted to talk about some interesting things in this episode that I don't normally get to talk about because it's kind of infrequent when I do unit responses or voice acting for dialogue, and it's going to become a lot more frequent in this year because in 2024 we are making a push for Cosmonarchy Brood War, the most premier/ambitious project ever made within StarCraft, the giant conversion that it is and that it represents. It's many years of work now, and we are getting pretty damn close to being able to ship you guys a very epic updated launcher that'll handle the updating process and, of course, the installation process. Just reduce that barrier of entry quite a bit. You don't need to be a tech wizard to install it anymore after this world achievement is created. But the other thing that we should be looking out for is content, right? And that's another thing that I think is holding us back a little bit. And so we'll be making content that is, of course, single player campaigns and other such offerings, maybe some more co-op stuff. And we've already been essentially flourishing the list of what we call triggers, which are triggers but custom ones. And triggers, of course, for those who are not aware, are essentially how you handle map events in the game. You can kind of think of them as like scripting or something. So you can design a mission and then have an event happen in that mission. Well, that's a trigger. And so we have triggers, which is a shorthand for custom triggers, or comment triggers, actually, because that's like the technical term for how they're done. But you can think of them as custom. And so I've been hard at work making more and more of those, mostly because of Pr0totype and BiddyB, two community members who have donated money with the express purpose of funding that particular task. And so that's been ongoing. But yeah, all in support of the idea that we can make more content. And now in Pr0totype's case, and I think in BiddyB's case as well, they're interested in producing essentially customs, use map settings, essentially totally custom game modes that are completely different from the normal gameplay that you might see, but using a lot of the tools that we have within Cosmonarchy Brood War that don't exist within StarCraft 1 by convention. So just keep your eye on the ball for that in particular. And of course, Mapcrap is ongoing, this event that is essentially a mapper's workshop, the idea that you can make a level and then enter it into this contest, and then after that, you're judged based on how epic it is. I think my map, Anad's Greatsword, is going to be pretty epic, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next section of this podcast. But the first proper section is actually going to be about that voice acting stuff, and it is going to be kicking off into high gear when we get more campaigns on the line. These single-player initiatives, essentially sequences of levels that you can participate in. This is going to allow you to learn the game, experience the game from like a tutorial standpoint, but also you'll be able to go a little bit deeper than that as well in figuring out some compositions that work. Maybe you'll experience some pretty epic stories. That's the one of the ideas anyway, but to actually experience them instead of the story being told at you and then you kind of experience it in a disjointed fashion after the fact. That's not really what we're going for. So of course, if you've followed any of the supercuts lately, then you'll probably be aware of at least some details of how, admittedly a younger version of myself from years back, but still a version of myself, thought of a lot of custom content, a lot of essentially fan-made missions and campaigns. They weren't very good. But one of the things that the good ones had, at least the ones that were memorable in terms of their experience, those ones had voice acting. And voice acting is just, it seems like such an easy slam dunk thing to do, even if you can't do it super well. Some people have pushed back on this point in the past, but I just feel like getting in front of a microphone, even if it's a cruddy one, and giving the audience, the players, something to latch onto in terms of characterization, even if it's lo-fi, low fidelity, it's not the highest production value, it still gives you more of a efficient manner with which to communicate your ideas as a writer, as a story creator, you can say. And so, the medium of video games has long had convention that you have voice acting to accompany dialogue. And at least in the context of an RTS, that's pretty much always been the case. But, because people didn't want to do voice acting, I guess you can maybe argue that like Enslavers and some of the other like custom, well, not really custom campaigns, but there's like basically Blizzard, the entertainment company behind StarCraft, of course. And also in Warcraft 3, they did this as well. They've had campaigns where they have just dialogue with the stock characters, or maybe some side characters or whatever. But Mengsk was in Enslavers, for example, as a character in the original StarCraft. And so you think about it, he's actually been, there have been cases where they haven't actually done voice acting, even though these are characters that they should have done voice acting for because they had access to the actors, obviously. So I guess maybe there was actually a precedent set to not include voice acting in your campaigns by the main company themselves, but we would prefer to not do it that way, right? So anyway, voice acting for unit responses or otherwise is a pretty big deal, and we've done a pretty good amount of work with regards to the voice acting. It's a lot of me, but there are some people who have chipped in. I mentioned Pr0totype. He's actually the voice of the Matador for the Terran Arsenal. The Blackjack is voiced by the Beaver 99. We do have Mesk, Iskatu Mesk. He's voiced the Azazel, as well as he had a couple other voices, didn't he? He had the Magister and the Ecclesiast, so those are two Protoss units. Now, anyway, I feel like I'm forgetting a particular person who also did voice acting for one of these units, but I think that might be the only ones that we have right now that are, unit responses that need to be eventually like replaced. Are, I would say the Cyclops would be one such example where I've done a lot of voices, but I only have so much range as a human. We'll actually get into range a little bit later because that's actually somewhat related to a question that was asked in the coffee questions section. So check that out later on. But, I feel like when it comes to the voice acting for the unit responses, it's been a long time coming that we try to improve something and try to improve the variety. And to experiment with this, I was actually going to jump in and talk about the AI stuff that I've been looking into. So obviously AI is all the new hotness now in terms of every tech bro in existence is using it and trying to make a business out of it. Maybe I'm leaving money on the table by not looking into it, but I tried to experiment with it, and yes, they do indeed have AI that can take a voice clip that you have provided them and deliver it in an AI voice. And that can mean that you can take your voice as a guy, in my case, and then turn it into the voice of a woman, at least ostensibly. Of course, it's the voice of a robo-woman, a digital woman. And honestly, the biggest thing is that it's so very flat. You don't really get that much vocal range between the performances, if you want to call them that. The would-be so-called performances are very much just They have the one sort of cadence, the one sort of pacing, and even if you have different pacing in your delivery, which naturally you would as a human, there'd be subtle differences depending on how you wanted to go about it, you don't really get that reflected in the AI. And that's a little bit of a crying shame because maybe with this tech being improved later on, which I'm sure it will be, this could actually be a reality where I could theoretically have, a very small voice cast as I currently do, but we could get a lot of mileage out of each individual voice, or maybe I would only need one voice or whatever. That seems to be like the sort of idea that people are selling right now is that you can be a one-man show and just have AI handle it. Sort of like how auto-tune and other such features were essentially pitched as allowing you to do this well before AI was even a thing, a twinkle in most people's eyes. The main thing that I would just say about it is right now it's just not there for my standard of quality because I don't want to have the AI, or rather the unit responses, the sounds that play when you order a unit around or select them or whatever. I don't really want that to be a point of contention where you feel like they're just flat and they don't actually have any personality. Deputy Dad was hitting the streets. I don't know if you guys could hear that siren, but no matter, we'll get right back onto it. The main thing that I wanted to talk about when it came to the AI side is that it is supposed to essentially give you this idea that you can have your own voice be a lot more flexible. But what I'm mostly focused on, in theory anyway, is the idea that I've always said this about directing voice acting as a director for the voice casts that I've had to be a part of in the past, where I'm building, my own campaigns and my own dialogue and stuff. I have basically said to people, I know exactly how I want you to say this. I have envisioned it many different ways. You might have some give, you might have some of your own angle. That's totally fine, but at least say it the way that I say it. I literally will provide you the example takes. Say it like that in your own voice. I just need you to basically be a voice puppet. I'm going to puppet you and tell you how exactly to say it. You're going to say it. And then, yeah, sure, feel free to sort of riff on that if you want to. And maybe I'll actually like something that you say. I'm not even saying that like in a way that I always know best or whatever. But, I have my own idea of how I want it done. And so with that in mind, that's sort of the approach that I always took. AI is basically that, but without needing to contact somebody else and often pay them, or at the very least, run the whole social aspect of it, and, wait for other people to be reliable, hope that they're still around later when, you might want to do a sequel to this project and then maybe they're not available anymore. Like that could be a big deal. So anyway, that is the main thing that I would point to, is that when we're thinking about it from these perspectives, it's like, what exactly can we accomplish with AI? Well, it turns out right now, you can make people laugh. They'd be great for memes. And that's actually something that Pr0totype has done with Trenches, his very funny Japanese campaign. Very, very goofy. Okay. They're good for memes, but we need more than that, right? We need something a little bit different than that. in my humble opinion. So if we're going to do something that's a little bit more on the serious side, I don't know that we can do the AI angle. I might still experiment with it in the lead up to Anad's Greatsword. Maybe I can do something that, like maybe I can, I guess what you could potentially actually do and use them for is like robots. And I do actually have a sort of automaton character in Anad's Greatsword. So that could be a situation where maybe we can put the AI to use because I'm literally like building an AI or something like an AI that's like powered by an AI. Sure, why not? Then it doesn't matter if it's a little flat. Although I still think you'd probably get a higher ceiling out of like a really well-oiled sort of like a high quality actor who really understands the vision, which, hopefully I'm high quality and I definitely understand the vision because of my vision. So I think you could probably get a better performance out of just a human, essentially, even for an AI, at least right now. Maybe that won't be the case in the future in terms of like consistency. And maybe even then there's like, so I'm willing to be a little bit more flexible than I know, like, for example, a Scatumesk can be. He's one of the homies, and he's said before that like AI seems like it's a total joke in terms of the output that it can provide. And I kind of agree in the sense that if you're trying to use it for like game production, it definitely seems subpar. And this is true for like visuals as well. But I can see a use for it in terms of like quickly doing like a mood board or something where you just, especially for memes and like goofball jokes, like it makes total sense to do stuff like that. That's whatever. And so, I can totally see it. I can see it have some uses outside of like game production. But when it comes to game production, at least for the AI side, like I don't need it. I can see where there's like a trade-off. I don't need the absolute highest quality thing if that relies on me, like, say, paying out the wazoo for a high quality actor, or another thing that it could rely on or result in is like, okay, here's the sequel coming out and that guy is no longer available to do the voice. That has happened before. And so I would really hate for that to happen again. For whatever reason. So hopefully this makes sense. I guess the other thing that you might be able to use AI for, and that's like more of a small time deal, is or a niche use case would be like, say that you have a deceased actor, or maybe the actor is older now and can't do the same voice or for whatever reason. Being able to potentially clone that voice would be useful. However, everything that I've seen on this indicates to me that it is not ready for game production. You'd be taking a significant like quality cut in the audio in order for that to happen. Although I think the last time I experimented with that was like last year, middle of last year. So maybe the tech has moved on that. But unfortunately, for better or for worse, I think AI has had a reputation for literally just vomiting forth nonstop content and output, having really high output, but not really high quality. It might be like, at best, like say 60, 75% max quality, out of like, what you can get out of like a diligent author and stuff. So that's sort of just my thoughts on it right now as it currently stands. But I did do some AI experiments, and it was because I wanted to, expand the voice cast, have more stuff like that. I think it makes a lot of sense to try to do, and maybe there will be other tools. I guess for context, I used 11labs.io, I believe. Pr0totype used that for his Trenches campaign, and so I used it for actually, like, he used it from text to speech, but he was using it in Japanese. So, like, for all we know that's really awkward Japanese. It may very well be. For my case, I was using it for, I recorded like dialogue, right? I took unit response recordings that I already had lying around, and I fed that into the website, to the service, and it spat out AI sort of readings, if you want to call it that, of that text, of that or of the same reading. So I took my audio and converted it into its own audio, which I think would give you better results in theory, because you're actually providing it with a base text, right? Like a base reading of the text, and that gives it way more accuracy, I would think. However, oftentimes they would really mess the delivery up massively in terms of the intonation, like where are the inflection points in the sentences, what do they really focus on in terms of the intonation. The other thing that really got me was when I can't remember exactly the line. It was one of the Paladin lines. Oh, it was keep digging. So the Paladin Terran unit, he's got a very boisterous voice, and one of the things that he says when you select him sometimes is keep digging, as into, obviously implying keeping, dig more trenches, dig more corpses, or more graves for all these corpses. But the main thing that you get out of that when you put it into the AI for some reason is they say cheap digging. That should have almost been the title of this episode, cheap digging. That would have been such a deep cut, because like I think 10 people were watching the stream when that was happening, but it's still pretty funny. I'll never forget cheap digging, I guess, since I thought I did forget it, but I didn't. It came back to me. So AI is still in the dustbin for now, but we will be, taking a look at it. Maybe it can fill some niche roles, like I mentioned. If you literally need an AI voice, it might be useful. If you have that, if you need an AI voice that is like laid back, or I guess restrained in terms of how many different things it can do and how much range it has, it might be pretty good. I definitely do recommend the concept of giving your own reading of it and then using it. So if you're going to use 11 Labs for this or something else, definitely do that approach. And hey, if you know of another site that maybe in your experience is higher quality than 11 Labs, or you've just used another site with this exact feature, let me know. I'll take a look at it. Maybe I'll get some more value out of it, because I don't know how proprietary this stuff is. So for all I know, we've got competing services that might actually have a better usage in some capacity. But 11 Labs is just what I was recommended, and I haven't really dived in deeper. I've done a lot of tests on that website, but I haven't dived in too deep on terms of the actual like other competition and stuff for that particular service. So that was the AI experiment section of the unit responses. I guess it is worth noting that we will actually, there's a reason why the Empress is pictured in the today's screenshot, our episode screenshot here of Protoss Empresses slowly taking control of a Zerg base, including some of the Hydras that it had made. The main idea behind the Empress being here is that, for my money, one of the things that I really wanted to achieve is, of course, like one of the AI experiments was take my renditions and convert it into a woman, a femoid, if you will. I happen to like women, and unfortunately, there's just a very, I would say there's like a surplus of people in the community who are obviously like, I mean, the whole thing skews male. That's fine. The problem is, like, in terms of voice acting, you kind of have to know somebody who knows somebody. It turns out I do know somebody who knows somebody. I know a guy who now goes by Chumbeque, but used to go by Hoop Thrower. That's how I found him anyway. And he's a pretty cool guy down from Chile. He's the kind of guy who might know a thing or two about speaking to women, something that I've occasionally tried. And the main thing I would say about the angle that he's taken is that he's offered to actually provide. I can't remember who it was. It might have been in a cast over, or there was maybe it was another episode of Pr0totype actually, that he had posted the offer to take to sort of run the idea of somebody voice acting the Empress specifically. And so I did a write-up. I wrote out the unit responses, which I hadn't done. And then I also wrote up like a direction. And then this morning, I actually did some sample recordings, line readings as an example. We'll see how they turn out. I'm definitely eager to check that out at some point and see if we can make use of it. Because I think right now it might still use the Panoptis unit responses, which is really awkward. It wouldn't really be the end of the world if I had to switch the portrait and voice profile to a male and then just do my own lines that way. Because sure, like you can call it the Empress, just like you can call it the Siren and the Striga for Terran, and maybe there's like some sensible reason for that. Like that's just the affectionate name for it, even though those are female spirits and stuff, I guess cryptids. When it comes to the Empress, that's like a more vague term. Like you would think that maybe the Empress would be piloted by a woman just based on the name of the thing, but it's not really that big of a deal, right? So like I could go for it and say whatever, it doesn't matter. But if we can get a female for it, that was what I had originally envisioned, so that makes a lot of sense. So there might be a woman gracing your ears for the first time in Cosmonic Brood War history. We will become slightly more diverse. We do love that around here. That's actually how we get all of our money from BlackRock and ESG funds. JK, though. Actually, I think that stuff is pretty silly. Let's talk about the next section, though. I did want to comment on dialogue, because dialogue is not just for unit responses. Of course, it's also for in the middle of missions. And I have completed the briefing, first draft anyway, of the Anad's Greatsword script. So that essentially means that we've got this sort of audio play version of of sort of like, you'll basically hear some dialogue, some sound effects. It's going to tell a story. There's very limited visual storytelling there. You got like the portraits, the animated portraits of the characters, and then they do a looping talking animation or two while talking, and then otherwise they kind of sit there, and then I can combine that with some sound effects to make it feel somewhat more dynamic, where you get the opportunity to have people patching in for transmissions or whatever the case may be. But that's pretty much the extent of it. So the way that I'm saying it all for now is just to comment on the fact that Anad's Greatsword's briefing is looking like it'll be pretty tight. By that, I mean, I don't think it'll take too long. I would be very surprised if it lasts for longer than, like, say, 3 minutes. That's like an initial, I guess, like, idea for it. And so it's going to introduce the titular Anad Thyron, it is also going to introduce his 2 compatriots and his AI homie. So those 4 characters are going to be our characters for the mission. I don't think we'll hear too much from the other characters, but hey, one of the characters is actually an organ of the Zerg variety. So Zerg organs have never been depicted in Cosmonic Brood War. This is an opportunity for me to experiment, and because it's a map crap, I almost have like free reign to do whatever the hell I want with this. Because if I decide this doesn't really work for me, then I can say, well, that was a map crap, that was me experimenting. Here's the actual campaign stuff. And maybe I could like re-release Anad's Greatsword later outside of the map crap label with like a revised version of the script and dialogue and stuff. So for me, I think it's really cool. And that's definitely something I wanted to point out. I have decided to go for something, because there was a time, I think it was 2 podcasts ago, I actually discussed the differences between how you would write dialogue for Terran humans versus how you would write dialogue for Protoss. And I talked about how Protoss are less individual, and they're more, you could say, collectivist, in that they always say we for the most part. Like very rarely do they refer to themselves in, the first person. It's usually second person. So with that kind of thing in mind, that's like one thing that you would have them say. There's like a couple of other things, like usually they're a little bit, I guess you could say, less direct, in that they don't usually cut corners with their speech. They don't tend to mince words. They don't mind speaking. They're purposeful with their dialogue, but they don't. So it's not like they flower on forever. But what I would say about the Protoss differences compared to the humans is that generally speaking, like Terrans will probably like occasionally cut corners. That they might drop some prepositions here. They might drop some pronouns here and there. They might just like say, instead of you asking if this person is hungry, rather like the Protoss might ask, "Do you require sustenance?" or "Are you are you in search of food?" or whatever. They'll have a different way to do it. Whereas the Terrans might just say, "You hungry?" or maybe even just "hungry" with a question mark. And so like they're much different with how they would talk, right? So like that's a very obvious case. Now, for the organs, for Zerg, I've actually decided to go for a bit of a different angle than either of those. I didn't think I would be able to meet in the middle, because I feel like there's not actually that much middle ground to work within. So I decided to go for a much more extreme thing, where their dialogue is entirely utilitarian. It is as, I guess you could say it as efficient as it possibly can be. And actually, it's going to be fun, because I'm going to have Thyron, the protagonist of this particular level, respond in kind. He's a human, he's a Terran, but he will respond in the same way, actually, that the organs speak when speaking to them, when addressing them. So he's going to kind of provide them with the same thing. And maybe he's not going to be as good as it as they are, but that's essentially going to be his way of communicating to them. And there's going to be some technological marvels that allow him to communicate to these guys, because this is a hive mind alien race. So the fact that you can't usually just like speak at it's probably not going to be able to figure that out. So you got to find some way to interface with it in a different way. There are going to be some observations that are being done by the Zerg, but like, for example, when the Protoss arrives to help Thyron, he is quick and direct in that he says he will be there in mere moments, but he also asks for, is this location free for me to sort of like land at and stuff, or whatever. And so he has like some questions, right? The organ pops in, is summoned, so to speak, and its first dialogue line is one word. It's just directives, and it's critically, I don't actually have a question mark there. I actually just have like a dot, like a full stop. And that to me is kind of like, I'm going to have that be part of the delivery. So the other thing is that because the organ is made up of many cells, many agents, the thing that I would want to do out of the organs is actually have it so that they have a decided character to them, where they have a dominant voice, but they would have many supporting voices. So I think the dominant voice for an organ would probably be like, say, high pitch, low pitch, mid pitch. It might be growly, clean. There's many different like sort of permutations you can play with. And I would want to make sure that is complemented by a supporting cast. And basically I'll have to take every line of dialogue. I'll have to say it all multiple times in the different voices that make up a single organ to sort of create this chorus effect. And I like that, because I think it actually kind of works pretty well in a utilitarian sense, where if you need to speak with many voices, if you need to speak for many people, then making it as simple as possible actually kind of makes intuitive sense. And I guess on a more selfish level, if you want to call it that, it makes it easier to record one line 3 times or whatever, if that one line is like 5 words, you know what I mean? If it's a lot easier, then I don't have to worry about it as much. So I think that's kind of interesting. It's kind of neat. I do think that it's really cool to essentially have Thyron. He's a character that's kind of going to nerd out a little bit in that, or just like revel in the fact that he's got the allies that he has and that he's in the novel situation that he's in, because he's actually in search of a novel battle. That's sort of like the premise of the mission, is that this guy's seen a bunch of stuff. He's kind of been everywhere. He's kind of done everything. Give him something novel. Give him something he's never seen before. Well, that's exactly what happens in this particular mission. So it'll be a night worthy of being remembered. His final line in the okay, I guess it's not his actual final line. I might cut the subsequent line because I think his final line is pretty good. His final line, this line that could be his final line, is he addresses his AI guy and says, "You're a work of art," and then says, "I am marking the damn calendar." And I just like that idea that this guy has been in search for this for so long, and now he finally has it. And he's pumped. He's pumped to be in the middle of battle. It's not like, oh shit, I'm really dreading this fight. This is going to be hard. Sure, it's going to be difficult, but like he's relishing the fact that it's so new and so different than anything he's experienced before. So hopefully that kind of clues you in a little bit on what to expect at Inad's Greatsword and the dialogue and how the progress is being made. Obviously, I've been focusing a bit more on the faction stuff. I've actually been doing some modeling experiments, some 3D model stuff. Been pretty good there. And yeah, I guess the main thing to say is that pretty happy with the progress being made. Now, we are entering into a little bit of crunch time. I don't have that long before the 14th, which is when this is due by. So I'm going to spend a good amount of time today and tomorrow working on the script so that the next week, the first full week of February, I can focus mostly on doing voice acting and trigger work so that we have essentially all of the dialogue implemented, even if it's just the first draft. And then from there, we can probably just start focusing on like improving the AI performance, fleshing out the factions, and then, doing some general testing and maybe adding some more features and stuff in the meantime. But that is definitely going to consume a decent amount of my time. And I guess the only other housekeeping to say is that we were thinking about maybe doing an invitational for Tier 1 players, Class 1 players of the project. However, it didn't look like we had enough people who were immediately available. So I will sound the alarm bells once again for a week from Saturday. So this is probably going to go live publicly on Sunday. So a week from yesterday, upon the completion of this video, we will see about whether or not we can arrange something there. So maybe I'll see you guys then for some casting. And of course, I'll probably be doing some more supercuts and some more other content, like, of course, castovers and such over time. And you can expect more dev streams because I love dev streams. They're based. So we're blazing on through them. We only had those two central topics of discussion this time around, and now we get to the fan favorite part, coffee questions. If you're not familiar with coffee, it sounds like it's spelled Coffee, but it's actually spelled Ko-Fi. And you can find a link in the description if you want to give us money. That's right. And in exchange for giving us money, you can ask questions. We answer them, myself and Veek7. We essentially are the dynamic duo behind the No Frauds Club, and we are building many great things with much help from the community, not just financial, but also many other homies in the crowd. We think about Solstice, we think about DF, we think about Balathal, we think about Iskatu Mesk, we think about all y'all homies, and we are here to basically answer some questions, of course, but in exchange for money, of course. We are money grubbers, as you might expect. Yes, we did finally sell out, and it was for $3. So if you ask $3 or more, you can get some questions answered. And if you ask them every month, well, that would be lovely. So yeah, one-time donations accepted, of course. Monthly donations accepted, of course. And up first, we have Myrian, the king of one-time donations, perhaps. Might be the case. I actually haven't gone back and looked, but he's definitely been around for a hot minute. He says, what do you think of alternate history, both as a concept or as a tool for creating narratives? So this is actually a really cool question. I love alternate history. I have always thought that even within like the idea, the realm of, you could call it fan fiction where you're making like custom content within a existing game, I think that it's really cool as an idea, as a counterfactual. That's how you can think of it as. If this happened instead of what actually happened, what would happen as a result? What would that change? What would that entail? I remember thinking, I had numerous campaigns planned that were going to do this sort of thing. One of the ideas that I had dating way back was, and only StarCraft lore nerds are going to get this, of course, but the Overmind was in a situation where he taps Zeratul, a Protoss character's brain, and gets the Protoss homeworld, But Zeratul at this time, of course, is a Dark Templar. He is not really thinking of Ire as much as he might be thinking of Shakuras, who is where the Dark Templar were hanging out. That's their home world at that point. And so I envisioned a world where the Overmind found Shakuras instead of Ire, and the location of the Dark Templar homeworld, and never invaded Ire instead, and like invaded the Dark Templar one. And it was going to be, I think, Zerg-centered at first, and I think it was going to, pivot switch to the Protoss afterwards, and you'd have to fight back against the Overmind having made landfall there. Again, very much a fan fiction thing. This is like my teenage years or whatever. I was thinking to myself, like, oh, what would be a cool counterfactual? And so that was one such idea that came to my mind. Sort of like born of an idea that like maybe, obviously Zeratul is, I guess, old enough in lore to like know about Ire, but why wouldn't he think of his own homeworld instead? But maybe that's not, maybe the Overmind was specifically looking for Ire and not Shakuras. Maybe he already knew about Shakuras. Who knows? I don't know what Blizzard was thinking exactly. I feel like they didn't really plan their stories out very well. But regardless, that is something that I think was pretty neat. Just as an idea, like a pitch. I don't think I would have made a very good campaign back then, but if I had, if I were to do something like that now, it could be interesting as like a alternate history thing. I do think that a couple of other alternate history ideas that I had, I remember it was, what if the Umojins invaded Ire during the Zerg invasion and took control of a Cerebrit? It was like kind of weird. Like that's not like one action different. That's like a whole military apparatus being different. But it's like, okay, this Terran sort of subfaction, if you will, this nation of Terrans invades this Protoss homeworld during the Zerg invasion of it, so that they can like capture a Cerebrit, study it, like maybe see if they can control it, that sort of thing. And then that's a campaign called Deliverance. Some people who have been around for years and years may remember that name. That's what that campaign was all about. So I definitely had some ideas way back. A lot of them were very ambitious, but it's cool to think about like essentially what would happen if something weird happened, where like suddenly this thing was different about the story that we are all aware of as fans of a particular, or players or whatever, of a particular game, or readers of a book or whatever. I think it can be pretty interesting. Now, I also think alternate history is really cool for studying and postulating what could happen differently in your own life, in history, more broadly, like based on what you already know about history. It can be very interesting as like essentially, it could be like a fun logic puzzle, and an interesting, like, it is just like sort of thoughts in the ether. You could kind of think of them as almost masturbatory in a sense, where they might not really be super good in the context of like, you might not be doing anything by thinking about these thoughts forever, but I think it can be interesting sort of brain candy to think about like, what would my life be like if this happened differently, or whatever. So I think they can be kind of neat for, I guess, recreation and also introspection, reflection. You keep these ideas in your head, you keep your own history in your head. It can be pretty useful, I think. Now, obviously, I'm talking about applying it very differently, but still, it's a thing. Now, that's it as a concept. I guess you also got the answer about tool for creating narratives. I think the biggest thing that you can think of is if an author perceives that, part of their story went wrong, they can kind of go back to it and then tell a what if. And I kind of feel like that's usually a cop-out lazy thing, because usually the people who are doing that, for example, I think StarCraft 2 had this, or something in some Blizzard game had this, where they had essentially what ifs. I think that's like why Tychus is like a character you can control in StarCraft 2 co-op when Tychus died at the beginning or the end of the first campaign. So it's like, what are you even doing? That doesn't even make sense. But one of the things that I will say is that it's pretty clear to me that the way that we're thinking about it in the context of building an understanding, I guess, of what history could have been and what the universe could be differently if something else had happened, that's an interesting idea. And it might even be cool for like, fan service is like a loaded term now, but it might even be cool just to explore and to see if you have the same writer who understands his work deeply and decides to try to do that as like an interesting idea, right? I've actually done this a lot in comedy stuff, but not necessarily in serious stuff. So maybe something I'll experiment with. But thanks for the question, Myrian, and hopefully you found the answer interesting. Well, the questions are going to keep on coming. I hope you guys are strapped in nice and tight. We got Pr0totype here who asks, of all the Xibalba regencies, which are the most and least anime? So this is obviously, I think it's obvious, but Pr0totype, I did say he was making that Japanese silly campaign called Trenches. He's still working on one of the final rounds of it, actually. He's working on map 6. We'll see if that's the last one or not, but that'll be released on the 14th of February, so stay tuned for that. And in it, he made some very funny men. Will he have any women? I wonder. I guess he has the adjutant. He's the advisor. But anyway, he's got Hard Man. He's got Weed Man. He's got Drunk Man, who's actually Mason, but temporarily called Drunk Man for a couple of transmissions. And then what else was there? Quasman, Flame Man, Hey Man. Hey Man was one of my favorites, dude. Whisper Man. There's all sorts of man. So anyway, he's a, I guess you could call him like a connoisseur of anime. And by that, I mean, he's seen a lot of bad anime, so he knows what makes it bad. So he's aware of it. He's certainly a pundit and that is aware of what silly things you can make out of anime and tropes and stuff. And so he might even be thinking of like in the far future, is he going to make a custom campaign like Trenches in whatever the first game of Xibalba is called? Because it won't be Cosmonarchy anymore. I think we've clearly done that name to death with Cosmonarchy Brood War. I think we're going to retire it at this point and make something very different for Xibalba. But anyway, so what are the Trenches races going to be? You know, so okay, let me think about this. I kind of feel like it really does. I'll pick out a couple of names that stand out to me, and I'll tell you what I think they remind me of. Now, I have to disclose, I like literally the only anime I have ever watched from start to finish for one season was the first season of One Punch Man, and Kian was the guy who showed me it. So he's the reason why I haven't watched one anime season ever. And everything else has been like a couple of scattered episodes. Or like when I was so young, like I watched like 3 episodes of Bobobo, and that shit seemed like a total fucking fever dream. And I probably would watch that again. But just because it was so wacky. I just remember like some guy who had like underpants and a duck on his head. Or no, I think he had underpants on his head, but inside his head was a duck. I don't know, dude. It was a weird show. So anyway, I have not really seen that much of anime. So when I talk about things being anime, I'm usually kind of talking out of my ass because I don't really know what the fuck that means. But I hope that this answer is still worth Three Crows, opportunity. I guess you could think of like, so, okay, the Solar Throne comes to mind as like the antagonist force, is like the guy who just wants to kill everything and like has like a ruinous plot or whatever, and maybe some sort of like tragic backstory. I know that's not like an anime specific trope, but I kind of think about it like I've seen anime or seen like the trope of an anime where like the villain of the piece is just really over the top, and that's kind of what the Solar Throne are like. They're over the top, they're very malevolent, very malicious, but they present themselves in such like a ridiculous, audacious, flamboyant way with regards to how aggro they get. And I feel like that's pretty funny. So I would say they would probably be the antagonist of the anime. I think you could make either the Keltar or the Ansifi the protagonists. The Ansifi would be the protagonist race if it was supposed to be like One Punch Man, where it's just kind of like an everyman guy who happens to be really talented or really especially powerful. Ansifi aren't that powerful like One Punch Man is, but they're powerful enough in the sense that they can contend, and they're kind of just like the everyman. You would make it the Keltar if you wanted to make him like a Ronin or something, or like or not a Ronin, a samurai. Ronin are the ones that have gone rogue, I guess, in some ways, or have no longer serving a master. We all know that the Keltar are their battle-born. Maybe they would be more like Ronin than Samurai. I guess Samurai would be like the Githrovans or something, because the Githrovans are more honorable. Keltar are honorable in the sense that they want to challenge you to a duel. They want to fight their battles out. So they're more like barbarians, but ones that they don't like. Well, yeah, no, I guess barbarians don't really do subterfuge or class or anything like that. They just kind of smash it. So whatever. The Keltar is like maybe the Keltar is like the easily manipulated nemesis to the protagonist that isn't actually, it's sort of like friendly competition, but he wants to one up the protagonist in every way, and he might be like easily turned against him and then becomes his ally when the subterfuge of the villain is revealed or something. That would be the Keltar, and I guess the Githrovan would be like the honorable one. So we skip the Githrovan because I don't think they apply. We need like a sage character, like a meme sage character. I don't even know who that would be. I don't know if there is one. I don't know. A trickster, if there's any trickster, it would have to be Kolopoazos, but they're kind of too powerful for that, so I don't really... I mean, I guess they can be. They're just like super disaffected. And then who would be the sage? Maybe it would be a Katithron. Katithrons are the ones that experience all of their life at once, so they're kind of like in a weird existence, like existential state. Time is not really like a normal dimension to them. So you could kind of think of that as like the sage, where he's seen it all, I guess. Or he's like at peace with whatever he's seen. I don't know. That's like an idea. All right. Well, anyway, hopefully that was enough anime for one sitting, and I think that 3Crow will have some thinking to do when he's thinking about what to make in Trenches or for Trenches Part 2 or whatever. So pretty epic. I hope you like that answer, buddy. So again, Chumbeque, aka Hoop Thrower, he is indeed somebody who has asked a question this time around, and it is related to finding a voice. It's related to voice acting. He says, "What's your approach to accents? In particular with alien factions, how do you give them a unique voice and identity that separates them from one another?" And then he asks opinions on having voice lines in different languages to separate factions further apart. So I'll obviously take a couple of these. My approach to accents is, I actually think that for Terrans, it makes perfect sense to have a lot of accents in the context of, I try to make it so that they don't really immediately sound like a Russian or a German or a whatever. Like if you listen to the Madcap, it's like this weird mishmash of audio where it's kind of Germanish, but it's also kind of like oddly, I don't know, like not exactly Hispanic, but it's like, it's just weird. It doesn't neatly fit into people's, their understanding, their construction of what they think like any one accent sounds like. And that was intentional. That was a design, like by design. I actually have decided to come up with Terran names in the same way. I take something that already exists and then I kind of like butcher it a bunch and change it a bunch, because that's sort of what happens with dialects and with accents and with names as well. Like people are spelling names that may have the same essential pronunciation as before, but they spell it completely differently. Or maybe they change one letter, one consonant in it, and then, like that's how you get something like Anad-Thyron, right? And so that's like one example anyway. Like even the fancy sounding names like Mazakel for the Terrans, like that's a character that I have within Chrysiliant. And he's one of the Hekaton leaders. And he's like, Mazakel sounds like a really crazy name, but that's his last name. His first name is Arthur. But I'm probably going to spell it in a weird way. And that's not to be hip and edgy. It's or whatever. It's not to be like hipster and like, oh, my guy's different. It's because that's probably what would actually happen if they were going to have his first name be Arthur. It would be like, maybe it would be Arthur with like an E or Arthur, like instead of an A. I don't know. Like I'll have to think about it. But maybe I will decide to keep it with the old one, and he's the throwback. But like most of the characters are probably going to have just slightly different names. Like that's what I imagine the future will be, is like endlessly riffing on the same shit until somebody comes up with something different. So. And maybe a lot of it is not going to be recognizable before. Like maybe people can't figure out where Anad came from as like a name. Who knows? Like it's possible. But absolutely something where that's sort of like what comes to mind for accents too. Now this is in the context of, sci-fi. I think I do have a little bit of an aversion to using accents for alien races. Obviously push comes to shove, you can do what you got to do. We all have accents / dialects, like I'm sure for somebody who's not American, if they're listening to the Protoss voice acting, maybe they would bat an eye at the Protoss being, an alien race that speaks with an American accent, because I'm the American doing most of the voice acting. Maybe the same is going to be true for the Zerg once I do the organs. Who knows? But one of the main things I would point to is, I guess like for me, I wouldn't want to use accents for aliens if I could help it, in the context of like, I would want very neutral voices that are just like male, female, whatever. And the reason for that would be, in my opinion, it does us no good to associate aliens with, like, say, Russians or with, Argentinians, or like insert accent here. Like, I can do an okay Russian accent. I can do okay Russian pronunciation, but like, why would I do that for an alien? The aliens are not Russian. They don't have Russians. They don't have like a Russian equivalent. And if they did, for whatever reason, culturally have something that was kind of similar to what Russia is to us in modern day, in modernity, like that would still be very different. And there's no reason for them to evolve the same, like tenor of how they deliver lines and the language and the accents and stuff. So it kind of just pops my bubble immediately. If I see like, for some reason, this like Star Wars character who's an alien has like a Russian accent or a weird accent or whatever, I always go to Russian, because it's nothing to do with current geopolitical events. It's entirely because for whatever reason, in a lot of the media that I watch, it's like American and then they have like the one Russian. I don't know why that's a thing, but that's just what I've grown up on. So we comment on that. We just say like, hey, when we're thinking about accents, we got to make it purposeful. Basically, I just think about it. That would be like the main thing. And so that kind of means that, I would imagine a lot of the characters that I choose, if you have an accent, like a heavy accent, then it's probably going to be really obvious that you're not ideally cut out for the role. But, beggars can't be choosers, so I'm not going to say no to somebody if they can do a good Protoss voice or whatever, but that's just how things are. Like, I would probably err on the side of nudging them towards the Terran role instead, if they had like a super heavy accent. Like if they were a German or something, like, okay, hey buddy, you want to try to speak in a British accent as a German? Maybe that will be a good accent for the future. It's just like totally busted. Like, yeah, it doesn't matter that it's totally busted. Just do it. Just see if it works. So there's the answer to the accents part. The follow-up was, for aliens, how do you give them a unique voice and identity that separates them from each other? So that's kind of like almost, he has some prescience, this guy. He predicted I was going to say that about aliens and say that, like, I don't like accents for that. So with alien factions, I think you can do a lot with like pitch and tone that doesn't have to be an accent per se. I think you can kind of center it around like a general sort of American / I guess like you could just say Anglo-Saxon vibe, where it's like very much like American / British, but the British would be subdued. It would be more like how the Brits put enunciation on things and less about their actual accents themselves. So it'd be like more diction, I guess, in some ways for word choice, but it would also be like just how they shape their certain like sentences and how they end sentences maybe. And that would be like, that could be the dividing line, is like, you might have an upper class type character and a more working class type character, right? And so that can be done through, harshness, gruffness. Obviously it can be done through poshness or whatever. And you don't need to actually invoke an accent per se. You just have like a little bit of a different dialect, different pacing. You can have like slightly different pronunciation of certain terms. I think that happens in, modern speech as well. I don't know if I do that for Protoss, obviously, but like I remember I used to have this thing where like the executor character would say resources and like the judicator character would say resources. And for some reason that was really important. Like I thought that would actually like help make the characters seem like they were more distinct. I think in retrospect, it just made it more confusing, but that could be a thing that you could try to go for if it makes sense within the physiology of the race. Like for Protoss, they speak with their mind. So we're using voices for the same reason we're using voices for like the hive mind Zerg, is because it's a convenience factor of like, we need to translate it to the player somehow, and we should do that with voice because that's sort of like the convention of the game. So there's some abstraction there between what's actually happening in the world and how the player is experiencing it themselves. But that abstraction makes sense in the context of the medium. Whereas like in the context of having accents or having slightly different, you would say dialects or whatever, that doesn't really make as much qualitative sense in this context for Protoss because they're speaking with their minds. So you wouldn't necessarily say that. But I also think it wouldn't really be the end of the world if you did do that, as long as your characters feel mostly like they are Protoss most of the time. I don't really think it's a huge issue. Like that, I'll put it to you this way. If that's a feature in like most custom campaigns that have voice acting, which maybe it is, like characters speaking slightly differently than each other, even though they're the same race, or having an accent for the Protoss or whatever, that is like by and far and away not the primary problem with the voice acting of those characters usually. So there's a lot of other problems you can fix along the way before you think about, okay, can I optimize for like the last 2% that I'm missing or something that this issue would fix or something? You know what I mean? So this is just my personal preference. And having voice lines in different languages, I would say the same thing about the accents for me, is that like if it's an alien thing, that's a little bit weird. And if it's not an alien thing, well, it's a weird thing for aliens if it's a human language. If it's an alien language and they have different alien languages or sub-languages or whatever, that's fine, but probably very obtuse and a lot of work to make conlangs and stuff, constructed languages. The thing that I was thinking about for humans, if you had human languages, would just be like, okay, does it make sense though? Like, do we go back to the idea of the future is basically riffing on modernity and forever and many, many cycles? If that's the case, then I don't know you'd have the same languages, right? So maybe more things to think about. Probably fine, but I don't actually know enough about like languages in theory to riff on them in a way that will make like different words or pronunciations that won't be just weird as fuck. Anyway, I feel like there's kind of this idea where all of the Terrans speak English. It's not actually that they're speaking English. They're just speaking some common galactic language or whatever. And that gives you the idea, like the English is just for the convenience of the audience. It's a localization thing for the media, as opposed to like an in-universe thing. They're actually speaking English. So hopefully that makes sense. It's not diegetic, basically, is what I'm getting at. All right, that was the answer about the most topical question related to this, but we do have another one coming down. In between then and now, we will answer the Shambler's question. Now, this question is an absolute doozy, and it is also about Xibalba, similarly to Pr0totype. The Shambler had asked previously, by the way, which was the most and least based, or maybe like the most based and most commie or something, regencies in Xibalba. Yeah, okay, I already answered that, but this is actually a serious question about the universe, so it's kind of interesting. The Shambler asks, since the Solar Throne are stated to be seeking the same goal as the Githrovan, achieving commencement, but through genocide instead of genuine peace, does that mean that if presented with a surefire way to cleanse the universe of life forever, but at the cost of its own existence, that the Solar Throne would take that deal? What if it is provided a surefire way to achieve commencement, but without total annihilation? The Solar Throne don't care if they stay alive. They don't have self-preservation in the conventional sense. They have it insofar as they need it to achieve the goal, but if the goal is achieved and they die in the process, yes, they would take that deal. The interesting thing about commencement is that it is definitely going to be pilloried by most people who see it as not utilitarian, utopian, where the Githrovan are essentially trying to basically be galactic or universal police, and they are trying to, they're trying to quell any sort of inequity and attacks and stuff. It's well-meaning, but it doesn't seem very practical. Now, they created the Solar Throne specifically to try and jumpstart their efforts by giving themselves better technology, not just for weapons of war and stuff, but also for like in terms of being able to, without any rest, without any breaks or anything like that, have their will spread across the cosmos and in a way that would actually help, would actually be seen as positive change. There's certain evildoers, there's certain regencies that exist in opposition to the Githrovan sort of raison d'etre, right, their reason to exist. The idea that they're achieving commencement by achieving galactic peace is very haughty as a goal, but it's also something where you would think about it and you would say, okay, that means that they are going to exterminate some races, though. Like some regencies just don't pass muster. Any artificial regency, that's Rune, Rosellium, there's obviously Solar Throne themselves. Those three need to go no matter what, right? So the Githrovans do not negotiate on that point. Even though Rune are organic, they're still very much a situation where you could basically think of it like, because they are artificial and because of their nature, the Rune are never going to allow for peace. They're never going to abide for peace. Rosellium obviously are only going to have peace if there's nothing around, which you can kind of say is true for the Solar Throne as well, but that's not the only route to commencement for them. But it's like sort of related to Shambler's question. And then there's some other regencies where it seems like it would be really difficult to negotiate with them. Gadamemter, the single super intelligence that is essentially like things become it absorbs them and become part of the super intelligence. And Gadamemter then would basically only achieve commencement peace if it was able to take control of everything in the whole universe. So that doesn't seem like it would be within remit of what the Githrovan commencement is all about. So that does definitely pose some threats. There are going to be some long-standing rivalries and more outright threats for what the Githrovans are trying to achieve. But in terms of the Solar Throne, yeah, they would accept a deal where nothing exists anymore. That would complete their programming, at least so far. That's how I've thought of it so far. Not all the Solar Throne are created equal. Like there's reasons why we could have Solar Throne mirror matchups in lore. In that, if you play against yourself, like what are you actually doing differently? For one, there could be, since they don't really care about like the lives lost or whatever, the Solar Throne could be deliberately warring with itself for the purposes of luring Githrovans into the trap or something like that, where it's like a bait war, basically a bait battle. That is absolutely something that could be happening. And there's some other genuine reasons where like Solar Throne can be corrupted like any other automata, right? So that could be a case where somebody has like essentially hijacked them or whatever. And there might be some other ways that I come up with that feel believable that are worth including as well. But yeah, they don't mind if they all cease existing, because maybe that's kind of the goal in the first place, right? Hopefully that question has been thoroughly answered. The Beaver 99 coming in from the top rope with the immortal question, what is the meaning of life, the universe, and everything? I actually read last year. Last year I read Dune, the whole Dune saga, but I also had read, read the first book in that series, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And I gotta say it was kind of shit. Like, I wasn't as much of a fan as I thought I would be. There's some, irreverent aspects to it that I can kind of get behind, but it kind of just felt like, and here will be very dry and satirical for the purpose of being dry and satirical. I don't know. It just didn't click with me. Maybe I should go back and try it again. I've read it before. This is the second time I was reading it, but the first time I was like a really young kid and I didn't remember much. Probably didn't understand much. There were some really absurd things that I did enjoy. Like obviously anything to do with the probability drive was pretty funny. I know it's like just wry British humor, and I'm not like an Anglophile, but I know a lot about British culture because I've spent a long time talking to Brits. So I kind of get it. Like that's sort of their thing, their shtick, if you will. But it's just, I don't know if I was, when I was looking at it, I wasn't necessarily thinking to myself like, yeah, this is really, high art or whatever. So maybe it's just not my cup of tea. I have all the other books in the series, but I have not bothered to take a look at them yet. So maybe that's something that I can get to. I have been meaning to read more books lately. So anyway, the answer to the question, obviously the glib answer is Ahmed or maybe chicken. But the other thing that I should say is, I have this quote I like to go by. I can't remember who said it, so I should probably look it up. I think it's Marcus Aurelius, actually. No matter what anyone says or does, my task is to be good. Yeah, that is definitely a Marcus Aurelius quote coming back to me now. So that is the meaning of life. That's what I say. Thanks for your question, homie. Talking to Alexhandr here for the final one. We had a lot of questions this time around. I do appreciate it, boys. Keep them questions coming. As long as that money's flowing, I'll be answering them every week. Alexhandr asks, share several of your favorite voice lines from your favorite games. Well, I'm going to be honest. Now, Alexhandr has played Warlords Battlecry in the franchise, so he is familiar with this. But I will not lie. The first thing that I thought of was the Blackguard for the Dark Elves. When you click on him, sometimes he will say, I am the void. And that shit's hilarious. Just like, honestly, a lot of the voice acting in the Warlords Battlecry franchise is just goated in the sense of like, it's very campy. I just celebrate. Like, I love it. I think it's great. It's a good time. There's a couple other options that come to my head. This isn't really related to like, it's not like a favorite, but it's a funny thing that came to my mind is when you play Warlords Battlecry 1 and you click on the giant, which in that game is actually like a ranged unit and turned into a melee unit in the second game. But the giant in Warlords Battlecry 1 says, I could eat a whole sheep. And then if you click on the the one in 2 and beyond, he says, I could eat half a dragon. And I remember noticing that in the context. I actually played like 2 and then maybe 3 and then 1 or something like that. So I didn't play them in order because I think we only had the second game to start. And the thing about this, the going from half a dragon to a whole sheep is, I just remember thinking, dude, that guy's a pussy. He would only eat a sheep. He wouldn't even eat half a dragon. Like, I don't know. For some reason, that was really funny to me. So, it was a formative experience. I still remember doing that. Clicking on the giant in Battlecry 1 and thinking, only a whole sheep? What the fuck is wrong with you? But yeah, obviously. Very food motivated, those giants. No matter which version of the game you were thinking of. Kind of like my dog. Favorite voice lines from my favorite game. I will say, there's one other one that is worth noting that's also from Battlecry, is the Barbarian Hero. The voice lines for that guy include, look at these biceps. It's very obviously like kind of Arnold Schwarzenegger. One of the lines he even says is, I'll be back. He says it like that. It's actually pretty close to what he sounds like there. I'm a little bit hoarse, but it's not really like the Terminator voice, the Arnie voice. It's like sort of like a riff on that, but using a lot of the same dialogue. So again, very campy and not very serious, like diegetic, you wouldn't say. But there was definitely some really funny lines. If you ever have him cast a spell and it's like Jormak Goo Goo or something like that's just, I mean, dude, I was like 12. I listened to that, by the way, and I thought to myself, holy shit, that's funny. So, like there's some lines for sure. But I'll throw in one of my own. I made a birthday map for my brother way back, a birthday level. And obviously we had a bunch of modding back then for something that was called Toddborn. It was a very goofy situation to be in, that I was making a game where one of the races was anime and the other one was police. So that was hilarious. And one of the things that I had was I voice acted the dog. And the dog, so we had the regular dogs, which actually had like normal dog unit responses, but I voice acted Highway, our dog, and just voiced as him. So I was sort of like his inner voice, if you will. And Cullen didn't know this, my brother. He did not know that I voice acted the dog. So he clicked on the dog after summoning him with one of his powers, and the dog says, "Peanut butter?" And he just fucking lost it, dude. He laughed forever. And so that made the whole project worth it. Like, forget all the other work, that the countless man hours that went into it. iCore collaborating, DF collaborating. I think Veek might have even helped out a little bit here and there, maybe on some of the later ones, maybe not that exact one. Dude, everything was made worth it. When he clicked on the dog, the dog said peanut butter with a question mark, and my brother just lost his shit. So I'll say that's definitely a favorite line, just from the experience that it had, because, family is pretty important, dude. Pretty epic stuff. And that kind of does it here, ladies and gentlemen. We have reached the final point. I could answer more of Alexander's question with more stuff, but that's everything that's coming to mind right now. I thought maybe I'd pull something from like a non-RTS game or something, but that's pretty much it for me, homies. We're going to close things out here. Nice and tight, an hour long. Normally these go over that, but maybe it's time we start bringing that back. Now, we did have a pretty cool episode of Crow's Nest over on the No Frauds Club YouTube channel. Veek7 and myself recorded that the other day. I thought it was pretty good. We talked about the Escozy. We can definitely talk more about that, and so you can stay tuned for more episodes. His microphone's back in action now, so won't be using the older one. We'll have a slightly higher mic quality from him in the future. But other than that, stay tuned for more updates about Mapcrap, more updates about my submission. I'll probably be releasing it for testing in the couple days before the due date, just in case people want to chip in and see it ahead of time. But we'll see how it goes. And stay tuned for more dev streams, more videos, doing flame knives, and of course, Malfurian's quest for supercuts. So if you're fans of those productions, then you'll be fans of the supercuts, because they're busted as fuck. And we'll, of course, be back with other content as well. So yeah, hope to see you guys then. Peace.